At the very beginning of its path, the United States was merely a narrow strip of former British colonies along the Atlantic coast. However, by the late 18th century, a powerful idea began to take root among American politicians, military leaders, and thinkers: the belief that the United States was destined for something much greater. This vision extended beyond westward expansion. It included the possible domination of all of North America, including Canada and Mexico. These ambitions were not without basis. After the War of Independence, the U.S. found itself a young and rapidly developing nation surrounded by imperial powers: British Canada to the north, French territories to the west, and Spanish holdings to the south. These were seen not only as obstacles, but also as challenges to be overcome. One of the primary drivers of expansion was the hunger for new resources. In that era, land was the most valuable asset, directly tied to wealth and prosperity. Expanding U.S. territory meant more opportunities for farming, trade, and resource extraction. New lands allowed settlers to establish homesteads, access key trade routes like rivers and ports, and exploit natural resources such as minerals, timber, and fur, critical for fueling the growing economy. Domestic economic pressure was also mounting. As the U.S. population grew, the eastern seaboard became increasingly crowded, prompting many to look westward as a new frontier in search of a better life. A second critical factor was security concerns about neighboring European colonies. Major powers like Britain, Spain, and France still maintained a strong presence in the Americas. Their military and political influence made many Americans uneasy. American leaders believed that only by removing European powers from the continent could the young republic ensure its long-term safety. Gaining control over all of North America was seen as a way to protect the U.S. from foreign threats and interference. But expansion wasn't driven solely by economic or security concerns. It was underpinned by a powerful ideology of exceptionalism. Americans came to believe they had a unique historical mission: to spread liberty, progress, and democracy across the continent. In 1845, journalist John O'Sullivan, writing in the United States Magazine and Democratic Review, coined the term manifest destiny. This concept justified expansionism by asserting that America was divinely ordained to spread its civilization across North America. The phrase "from sea to shining sea" became more than poetic. It became political doctrine. To achieve these goals, the U.S. employed a variety of methods. The most peaceful was the purchase of colonial territories from European powers. In 1803, the U.S. bought Louisiana from France for $15 million. At the time, Louisiana referred to all of France's North American lands, doubling the size of the U.S. In 1819, Spain, under pressure, sold Florida to the U.S. for $5 million. In 1854, the U.S. purchased a strip of land from Mexico in present-day southern Arizona for $10 million in what became known as the Gadsden Purchase to build a southern railroad. In 1867, the U.S. bought Alaska from the Russian Empire for $7.2 million. I've discussed that deal in more detail in another video. Highly recommend checking it out. There were also cases where the U.S. gained land essentially for free. In 1846, the U.S. and Britain peacefully resolved their dispute over the Oregon Territory by drawing the border along the 49th parallel. Britain retained the northern lands, modern British Columbia, while the U.S. gained the southern portion, modern-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana and Wyoming. Despite the language of diplomacy, the U.S. was not shy about using war as a tool of expansion. In 1812, under the pretext of maritime rights and trade, the U.S. invaded British Canada. Americans hoped local settlers would support them, but the campaign failed. Canada repelled the invasion, and in retaliation for the U.S. burning of the city of York, modern-day Toronto, in 1813, British forces captured and burned Washington, D.C. Neither side gained new territory from the war. Despite this failure, the dream of annexing Canada lingered in the minds of American policymakers for decades. The most significant expansionist war, however, was the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848 years. The conflict erupted after the U.S. annexed Texas, a move Mexico did not recognize. American forces invaded deep into Mexican territory, even reaching Mexico City. At the time, some radicals proposed making Mexico City the capital of a new merged nation. Southern politicians pushed for annexing all of Mexico, suggesting that Mexicans could be assimilated or used. But in 1848, the U.S. signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, acquiring California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona and New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. In return, Mexico received $15 million and debt forgiveness. This was the largest territorial gain in U.S. history. Despite these major successes, after the Civil War, the U.S. began to shift its priorities and eventually abandoned the goal of conquering all of North America. There were several reasons for this. First, the departure of European empires from the continent made Canada and Mexico less of a threat. Without European backing, neither country posed a serious danger to the U.S. Second, the North's victory in the Civil War shifted the U.S. economy from agriculture to industrial development. The nation no longer needed vast new lands for farming and exports. Instead, the focus turned to factories, railroads, and the production of industrial goods. Third, a new form of imperialism emerged. Classical imperialism involved direct conquest and annexation, but in the early 20th century, the U.S. transitioned to neo-imperialism, a system of indirect control via economic dependency, the dollar, military bases, and political influence. Instead of annexing land, the U.S. used protectorates, investments, cultural exports, and the support of friendly dictators. Many experts argue that this strategy was even more effective. Rather than managing new states, the U.S. came to dominate entire regions of the world without ever needing to annex them. First, nearby neighbors like Canada and Mexico fell under Washington's economic influence. Their markets, raw materials, and industries became increasingly dependent on American capital and policy. Soon after, this expansion spread across the Western Hemisphere as the U.S., under the banner of aid and alliances, asserted control over key regimes and economies. But the story didn't stop there. After World War II, as old empires crumbled, the U.S. emerged as the new global center of power. Under the banner of democracy and freedom, but driven by national interests, America extended its influence into Western Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Thus, born from a shift away from brute conquest, American neo-imperialism proved even more effective than old imperial dreams, securing American global dominance for decades to come.